a casual hoodie, a luxury showroom, and one jaw-dropping reveal. What happens when a car dealership manager misjudges the man who secretly owns it all? Daryl pulled into the parking lot of Prestige Motors, the flagship dealership he had recently acquired in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. The desert heat shimmered off the sleek luxury vehicles parked out front, their glossy finishes glowing in the afternoon sun. He parked his modest SUV in an unmarked spot at the back and stepped out, taking a moment to scan the dealership's facade. He wasn't dressed for attention, quite the opposite. A simple gray hoodie, slightly worn jeans, and sneakers were his uniform for the day. His decision to dress casually was deliberate. He wanted to see the dealership's true colors, to experience how it operated when no one knew the new boss was watching. As he walked toward the entrance, he noticed a small group of employees inside chatting near the front desk. The faint hum of laughter and casual conversation carried through the glass doors. Daryl opened the door and stepped inside. The air-conditioned showroom was a stark contrast to the heat outside, filled with the scent of leather and fresh wax. Rows of pristine cars gleamed under bright overhead lights. The chatter quieted as he walked in. Daryl caught the brief glances exchanged between employees, eyes flicking to his hoodie and sneakers. He felt the subtle shift in energy, the kind that spoke louder than words. Then from across the showroom she appeared. Susan, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Her tailored blazer and polished heels spoke of authority, and the clipboard tucked under her arm added an air of efficiency. She approached with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her expression was polite at first glance, but there was a tightness in her smile that didn't escape Daryl's notice. "Excuse me," Susan began, her voice cool and clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Daryl smiled, his demeanor calm. "Just here to look around," he said casually, gesturing toward the cars. Susan's eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe. Her polite mask slipped ever so slightly, replaced by something less welcoming. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, her tone carrying an edge of doubt. Daryl nodded, still smiling. "Something like that." Susan's lips pursed. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I could recommend—" Before she could finish, another employee called out, "Hey, Susan, the delivery guy is here." Her attention wavered, but her gaze snapped back to Daryl, as though ensuring he wouldn't wander too far. Daryl raised an eyebrow but kept his tone light. "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" The question caught her off guard, but only briefly. She recovered quickly, posture stiffening. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she replied with a forced smile. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to—" Daryl's expression didn't waver, though the subtle sting of her assumptions was undeniable. The moment lingered, tension hanging in the air. He glanced around the showroom, pretending to admire a nearby car, a sleek silver coupe with an aggressive design. His fingers brushed the door handle as he said, "Nice car." "It is," Susan replied, forcing another smile. "Perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." Daryl stood there for a moment, considering her words, then stepped back from the car. He nodded once, hands in his pockets. "All right," he said lightly. "Let's hear it." "What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, surprised by the directness of his question. Before she could respond, Daryl added, "If you think you know what I need, I'm all ears." Her polite facade cracked just enough to reveal the impatience underneath. "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly," she said. "I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Daryl smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's quite the assumption," he said softly. The statement hung in the air. For a brief moment, Susan faltered. Then, regaining her composure, she straightened her shoulders. "I'll be back with a list of options," she said briskly and walked away. Daryl watched her go, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the silver coupe, his reflection staring back at him in the glossy finish. This was going to be an interesting day. He stood in the center of the showroom, hands in his pockets, gaze drifting over the lineup of cars. Susan's dismissive attitude was hard to ignore. Around him, the staff resumed their conversations, though he caught the occasional glance in his direction, the silent judgment, the coded looks he'd become accustomed to over the years. Moments later, Susan returned, her clipboard clutched tightly like a shield. Her brisk stride and forced smile betrayed her annoyance. "All right," she said, stopping a few feet away from him. "I've compiled a few options that might be more suitable for your situation." Darrell tilted his head slightly. "My situation?" "Yes," Susan replied, handing him a printout of pre-owned vehicles, each with detailed descriptions and price tags. Well below the dealership's typical offerings, these were more accessible models, reliable, economical, and practical. Darrell took the list without a word, his eyes scanning the page. A used sedan, an older SUV, a compact hybrid. His lips twitched in faint amusement, but he quickly hid it, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "Appreciate the effort," he said evenly. Susan seemed momentarily disarmed by his calm response, but she quickly recovered, resting her hands on her hips. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping slightly as if she were about to share a secret. "I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Darrell met her gaze, his expression calm but unwavering. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Susan hesitated, but only for a split second. "I've been doing this a long time," she said confidently. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." "Out of their depth," Darrell repeated softly, his tone neutral, almost thoughtful. "Interesting." There was a flicker of uncertainty in Susan's eyes, but she pressed on. "I'm just being honest. It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." Darrell let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Honest, huh? I like honesty. How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. "The owner," she repeated. "That's right," Darrell said lightly, almost conversational. "I'd like to have a word with them." Susan's lips twitched in a poor attempt at a smile. "Well, that's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a busy person." "I'm sure they are," Darrell said with a nod. "But maybe you could give them a call and let them know I'm here." "I think they'd want to meet me." Susan's smile tightened. She was beginning to lose patience, and it showed. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to. If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants." Otherwise what?" Darrell asked, his tone still calm, though there was an unmistakable edge in his voice now. Susan's eyes narrowed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Darrell stood still, his gaze locked on hers. For a moment, the entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, Darrell reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "All right," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "I'll make the call myself." Susan blinked, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" "Just calling the owner," Darrell replied, lifting the phone to his ear. "Shouldn't take long." Susan's confidence faltered, irritation giving way to confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Around them, a few employees had stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the unfolding scene. Darrell held up a finger, as if to say just a moment, then turned slightly away, speaking into the phone. "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here?" He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning back to Susan. "They'll be here shortly," he said simply. Susan stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Who did you just call?" Darrell didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the showroom, his gaze lingering on the staff who were now watching intently. "Guess we'll find out," he said, his tone almost playful. The tension in the room was palpable, pressing down on everyone present. Susan shifted uncomfortably, her composure beginning to crack. Minutes passed, but the room felt frozen in time. She busied herself with her clipboard, though her stiff, deliberate movements betrayed her unease. Darrell, on the other hand, stood calmly beside one of the luxury SUVs, his relaxed posture only adding to the tension. The few employees scattered around the showroom whispered to one another, stealing glances at the scene. Everyone was waiting for something or someone. The sound of the main doors opening broke the silence. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tile floor. His expression was serious but warm, and his eyes immediately found Daryl. "Mr. Carter," the man said with a wide smile, extending his hand as he approached. "So good to see you." Daryl returned the handshake with a firm grip, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thanks for coming, Alex. Appreciate it." The room collectively stiffened. Susan's clipboard nearly slipped from her hands as her eyes darted between Daryl and Alex, the dealership's regional director. Her confusion quickly morphed into visible alarm. "Wait, Mr. Carter?" she echoed, her voice uncertain. Alex turned to her, his friendly demeanor shifting into something more professional, almost curt. "Susan, I see you've already met Mr. Carter." Susan blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for the right words. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize he's the new owner of this dealership?" Alex finished for her, his tone sharp. He glanced at Daryl with an apologetic look. "I trust this wasn't your ideal welcome." Daryl raised a hand, stopping him. "It's all right, Alex. I think Susan and I just got off on the wrong foot." His voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words that made the entire room hang on to them. Susan's face turned pale, and she took a small step back, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a lifeline. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Daryl asked, his tone still gentle but firm. "That I could own a place like this? That someone like me might actually belong here?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed utterly lost. "I didn't mean—" Daryl held up a hand, cutting her off. "It's fine, Susan, really." He took a step closer, his voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean in. "But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would you have treated me any differently? Would you have given me the same respect you'd give someone who walked in here wearing a suit and tie?" Susan opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. Daryl nodded as though her silence was answer enough. He turned to Alex, his voice carrying a new authority. "Let's gather everyone in the conference room. I think it's time we had a little chat about how things are run around here." Moments later, the employees filed into the sleek conference room. The air was thick with tension. The space, designed to impress with glass walls and modern furnishings, suddenly felt stifling. Susan sat near the back, her usual confident demeanor replaced with nervous stillness. Daryl stood at the head of the table, calm and collected, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Alex remained near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched the staff take their seats. The quiet murmur of whispers died down as Daryl cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the group. "Thank you all for joining me on short notice," he began, his tone measured but firm. "For those who don't know, my name is Daryl Carter, and as of last month I'm the new owner of Prestige Motors." A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Some employees looked curious, others embarrassed. Susan sank lower in her chair, avoiding eye contact. "I came here today dressed casually for a reason," Daryl continued, his voice steady. "I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel walking through these doors." He paused, letting the words sink in. "What I experienced today was disappointing. I was judged, not for what I could bring to the table, but for how I looked. And I'm not here to single anyone out, but we need to talk about what that says about the culture of this dealership." Susan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face flushed. Daryl's eyes briefly flicked to her before moving back to the group. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every person who walks through those doors, every customer who doesn't fit into someone's preconceived notion of what a luxury car buyer looks like." One of the younger sales associates hesitantly raised his hand. Daryl nodded toward him. "Go ahead, Mr. Carter," the man began nervously. "I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions." Daryl nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. We all have biases, whether we want to admit it or not. But here's the thing, and it's not enough to try to be fair. We have to actively challenge those biases. We have to create an environment where everyone feels respected, regardless of their appearance, background, or anything else." He paused again, letting his words settle. "This dealership has built a reputation for excellence. But excellence isn't just about the cars we sell, it's about the experience we provide. And from now on, that experience is going to be built on one foundation: respect. The room buzzed with quiet tension as Daryl spoke about inclusivity and fairness. A ripple of agreement moved through the employees, though a few faces remained wary. His gaze settled on Susan, who sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Susan," he said gently but firmly, "I want to give you the opportunity to speak. Is there anything you'd like to say?" All eyes turned toward her. She hesitated, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. I made a mistake," she admitted, her cheeks flushed. "I misjudged you, and for that I'm truly sorry." Daryl nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "I hope this experience will serve as a reminder for all of us, not just you, because change starts with accountability." He turned back to the group. "Moving forward, we'll be implementing new training programs to ensure this dealership represents the values I believe in. Every customer deserves to be treated with dignity. No exceptions. If anyone has an issue with that, now's the time to speak up." The room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. No one spoke, but the weight of Daryl's words lingered, pressing on everyone present. He let the quiet stretch just long enough to make his point before speaking again, his voice calm but resolute. "Good," he said. "I'm glad to see we're all on the same page. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary. This dealership is going to lead by example." He took a step away from the table, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on its edge. "Let me make something clear," he continued. "I didn't come here today to humiliate anyone. I came to understand what kind of culture I've inherited and how we can make it better." His eyes moved to Susan, who still sat quietly near the back. "Susan," he said, his tone softening, "you're an experienced manager, and I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are. But today was a wake-up call, for you and for all of us." Susan looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. "I understand," she said, her voice shaky but sincere. "I was wrong, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Daryl nodded. "I believe in second chances," he said simply. "But accountability comes first. I'll be meeting with you one-on-one to discuss next steps. For now, let's focus on moving forward." He straightened and turned back to the rest of the team. "We're not just selling cars here. We're building trust, creating relationships, and representing a standard of excellence. If you're on board with that, I'm here to support you every step of the way." This time, the murmurs of agreement were louder and more genuine. The staff began to relax, the earlier tension giving way to a sense of renewed purpose. Even Alex, who had been standing quietly by the door, nodded in approval. Daryl smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hinted at both relief and determination. "All right then," he said. "Let's get back to work. And remember, how we treat people matters more than anything we sell." As the employees began to file out, Susan lingered near the door. She approached Daryl hesitantly, her hands twisting nervously. "Mr. Carter," she began softly, "I just want to thank you for giving me a chance to do better." "I won't let you down." Daryl studied her for a moment before replying, his voice steady. "I hope you mean that, Susan. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they're willing to try." She nodded earnestly. "I am." Daryl watched her leave before turning to Alex. "Let's set up a meeting with the staff next week," he said. "I want to make sure everyone knows what's expected moving forward." "You've got it, boss," Alex replied with a grin, his respect evident. As Daryl stepped back into the showroom, he glanced around at the gleaming cars reflecting the afternoon light. He thought about the work ahead, but for the first time that day he felt optimistic. This wasn't just about running a dealership, it was about creating something bigger. A space where people were judged by their character, not their appearance, and Daryl was ready to lead the way.